Why do some conversations feel completely normal while they're happening, but strangely uncomfortable afterward? You're having dinner with your family. Someone casually asks how work is going. You explain that things have been stressful lately. Deadlines, too many messages, constant pressure. Your parent listens for a moment and says, "Everyone has stress at work. Just deal with it." The conversation moves on. Nobody argues. Nobody gets angry. But later that night, the moment comes back. You replay it in your head. Why did that response feel cold? Now imagine a different situation. A younger coworker walks out of a tense meeting and says, "That meeting felt really uncomfortable. The team seems burned out." The manager replies, "The project still needs to get done." Again, nothing dramatic happened. But both people leave the conversation with a subtle feeling that something didn't land right. This kind of moment happens all the time between different generations. Parents think younger people are overly emotional. Younger adults think older generations are emotionally distant. Everyone walks away slightly confused. So, what's actually happening in moments like this? Why do normal conversations about stress or frustration suddenly feel like people are speaking completely different emotional languages? In this video, we're going to look at something most people never notice. Different generations were trained to express care in completely different ways. And once you see that pattern, a lot of confusing conversations suddenly make sense. Because emotional expression is not just personality, it's learned behavior. Psychologists call this emotional socialization, the process through which families and cultures teach children which emotions are acceptable to show and how they should be expressed. Developmental psychologist Nancy Eisenberg has studied this for decades. Her research shows that children don't simply develop emotional habits on their own. They learn them by watching how adults respond to feelings. Some families respond to emotions by discussing them. Others respond by solving the problem immediately. Both patterns teach children something very specific about how emotions should work. And those lessons can stay with people for the rest of their lives. For many people who grew up several decades ago, emotional control was seen as a sign of maturity. You might hear phrases like, "Don't make a scene," "Stay strong," "Handle it." The message was simple. Difficult feelings happen, but you deal with them privately and keep moving forward. In that environment, emotional support often looks like problem solving. If someone shares a stressful situation, the natural response is, "Okay, let's figure out how to fix it." Helping means offering direction. Encouraging resilience means reminding someone they can handle it. Now compare that with the environment many younger generations grew up in. Schools began teaching emotional awareness. Conversations about mental health became more common. Parents and teachers encouraged kids to talk about feelings openly. In those environments, emotional sharing became part of connection. When someone describes a difficult situation, the expected response usually starts with acknowledgement. Something like, "That sounds exhausting," or "I can see why that bothered you." Only after that moment of understanding do people move toward solutions. Both communication styles make sense inside the environments where they developed. The problem appears when those styles meet. An older parent may hear emotional sharing and think someone is dwelling on the problem. A younger adult may hear quick problem solving and feel emotionally dismissed. Neither person is actually trying to be cold. They're simply expressing care in the way they learned. And this difference shows up in very small, everyday moments. For example, imagine texting a family member after a stressful day. You send a long message explaining what happened. A few minutes later, the reply appears, "Okay, just take care of it tomorrow." 3 short sentences. To the sender, it can feel like the emotion of the situation was ignored. But to the person writing it, the message underneath is confidence. You're capable. You'll handle it. Communication researchers have found something interesting about moments like this. People automatically assume that others express emotions the same way they do. So when someone responds differently, the brain quickly interprets it as lack of understanding. But most of the time, something much simpler is happening. 2 people are trying to show support using completely different emotional habits. One shows care by acknowledging feelings, the other shows care by reinforcing strength. And when those habits collide in everyday conversations, the result can feel strangely uncomfortable, even though both people are actually trying to help. Once you notice this pattern, something interesting happens. A lot of confusing conversations suddenly become easier to read. Take a very common situation. You tell your parent that work has been overwhelming lately. You explain the deadlines, the pressure, the feeling that everything is urgent all the time. Halfway through the story, they say, "Everyone deals with that. Just focus on the solution." Your brain may instantly translate that sentence as, "They don't understand." But try something different in that moment. Ask a simple question. Did you ever deal with something like that at work? That one question often changes the entire conversation. Instead of reacting to your emotions directly, many people become much more comfortable sharing their own experiences. You might suddenly hear stories about difficult bosses, or periods when they were under constant pressure, or times when they also felt overwhelmed but didn't talk about it much. The emotional experience was always there. It just needed a different path into the conversation. The same adjustment works in the opposite direction. Imagine a younger coworker describing a frustrating situation in detail. Your instinct might be to immediately offer advice. Your brain starts organizing the solution. First do this, then try this, then say this. But if you pause for a few seconds and add one simple sentence first, the tone of the conversation often changes immediately. Something like, "That sounds like a really frustrating situation." Then you can follow with, "Have you thought about trying this?" The advice doesn't disappear. But now the emotional signal has been received. Psychologists studying close relationships have found that feeling emotionally understood is one of the strongest predictors of trust and cooperation in conversations. When people feel that their emotional experience has been noticed, their brain relaxes. The conversation becomes easier. Another helpful shift is learning to recognize the difference between sharing emotions and asking for solutions. These two things sound similar, but they invite completely different responses. If someone says, "I don't know what to do about this problem," they're usually inviting ideas. But if someone says, "This situation has been exhausting," they're usually asking to be understood first. Many generational misunderstandings happen because these signals get mixed up. The brain hears a problem and jumps straight to fixing it. But the person speaking was actually asking for recognition before advice. Once you start paying attention to this distinction, something surprising appears. You begin noticing how people show care in ways that don't always look emotional. An older relative may rarely say, "I understand how you feel," but they might ask practical questions about your plans, your finances, or your schedule. Those questions are often their way of checking if you're okay. Concern expressed through logistics. You might also notice the opposite pattern. A younger colleague might spend time discussing how a meeting felt or how a comment affected the group. To someone used to a more restrained communication style, that may seem overly focused on feelings. But in that environment, emotional clarity is part of maintaining trust within the team. Different communication habits, same underlying goal. Once you recognize that, conversations across generations start feeling much less tense. You stop assuming the worst interpretation. Instead of thinking, "They don't care," you begin thinking, "They're showing concern in the way they learned." And that small mental shift changes how you respond. You stop trying to force everyone into the same communication style. Instead, you start translating. You recognize when someone is offering encouragement through problem solving. You recognize when someone is asking for emotional acknowledgement first. And once those signals become easier to read, everyday conversations start feeling far less awkward. Because the real problem was rarely the emotion itself, it was the translation. If this made you think about conversations in your own life, you'll probably start noticing this pattern everywhere this week. Pay attention the next time someone responds to a feeling with a solution, or when someone shares frustration but isn't asking for advice yet. Those small moments reveal a lot about how people learn to connect. If you've experienced conversations like this with parents, co-workers, or younger relatives, share your story in the comments. Chances are, a lot of people here have experienced something similar, and if you enjoy understanding the psychology behind everyday behavior, subscribe for more videos like this.